Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today I'm talking with Loretta Collins Clover and Maria Grau Prejoan, and they are the editors and translators of this wonderful volume, The Sea Needs No Ornament, El Mar No Necesita Ornamento, a bilingual anthology of contemporary Caribbean women poets. So I'll start by introducing them. Loretta Collins Clover lives in San Juan, Puerto Rico, where she is a poet and a professor of Caribbean literature and creative writing at the University of Puerto Rico. Her first collection, The 12-Foot Neon Woman, was published in 2011, and Recantations in 2018, both of them with People Tree Press. Maria Grau Prejoan holds a doctoral degree in cultural studies with an emphasis on Caribbean literature and literary translation. She's a lecturer in the Department of Spanish, Modern and Classical Languages at the University of the Balearic Islands. So, welcome to you both, and thank you so much for being present today. And we'll start with two readings, and Loretta will introduce our two poets.
We're going to have a poetry reading now in a bilingual format. So we're beginning with Puerto Rican poet Gloriann Sacha Antonetty-Lebrón, who will be reading her poem Gloria in the original Spanish. Then Jamaican poet Margaret Lim will be reading our translation of the poem in English. Following that, Margaret Lim will read her poem on reading Thistlewood's Diary Part 3 in the original English, and our Puerto Rican poet Gloriann will read the poem in the Spanish translation.
Y también voy a estar compartiendo con ustedes de mi poemario Hebras, un poema muy especial para mí. Está dedicado a mi abuela materna, Gloria Cruz Ayala. Se titula Gloria. Madrugaba la noche, me separabas los cabellos hasta trenzarlos, mientras me contabas de bailes de sociedad, vestidos y costuras en francés, sombreros pra y serenatas. Me cantabas sones cubanos, boleros y danzones, fascinada, no dolían los jalones que sanabas con bálsamos de coco. Me escondiste tus pesares, fue un secreto ser la amante, dama matriarca de barrio, centenaria. Hacía tiempo que no me peinabas, ya me hacía falta vivir en tus manos arrugadas, la sabiduría, sentirte nostálgica. Amanecía, abrí los ojos con mi pelo listo, renovada. Mientras tanto, se derramó la sangre debajo de tus canas. A mi abuela Gloria. Gracias.
Gloria by Gloriann Sacha Antonetty-Lebrón. Pre-dawn hours of night, you parted my hair to braid it, while you told me in French of society dances, dresses, and sewing, papas, rabota hats, and serenades. You sang to me Cuban sones, boleros, and danzones. Fascinated, I wasn't hurt by the pulling, which you healed with coconut balms. You hid your sorrows from me. It was a secret to be the mistress. Centenarian, matriarch, dama de barrio, It had been a long time since you'd combed my hair. I'd miss living in your wrinkled hands, the wisdom, feeling your nostalgia. Dawn, I opened my eyes with my hair finished, renewed. Meanwhile, blood seeped underneath your gray hairs.
Saludos, buenas. Gloriann Sacha Antonetty-Lebrón desde Puerto Rico, por acá para compartirles dos poemas de la antología bilingüe El mar no necesita ornamento, The Sea Needs No Ornament, editada y traducida al inglés y al español por Loretta y María Grau. Para mí es un honor ser parte de esta antología de poetas caribeñas contemporáneas y voy a estar leyendo dos poemas. El primero es de la hermana poeta jamaiquina caribeña Margaret Lim. Se titula Al leer el diario de Thistlewood. Tiene un epígrafe que lee y dice: las canciones del esclavo representan los pesares de su corazón y le alivian, solo como las lágrimas alivian a un corazón dolorido. Frederick Douglass. Parte 3. Estimada Fiba, tu nombre casi rima con Siba, el paso de baile que está de moda. Así que cuando pienso en ti, digo, Siba, 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 como en la canción, y tú sabes, Fiba, no es una mala comparación, porque cuando las mujeres hacen Siba, se agachan para lanzarse, despliegan las alas y vuelan. Cuando ellas hacen Siba, Fiba, sus pies recuerdan las vueltas y giros que hacías en los velatorios de compañeros esclavos, cantando: cuando yo muera, aleluya, adiós, adiós, echaré a volar. Y el levantamiento, cuando el cuerpo entra completamente en acción, es para romper y liberarse de los grilletes, y yo canto: Siba, 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 y pienso en ti, Fiba, en la miserable esclavitud. ¿Cuánto sufriste por la culpa de cada infección que Thistlewood te pasó, al llenar de su esperma cada falda con la que le apetecía joder? ¿Cuánto debes haber sollozado cuando el hijo de él, tu niño mulato, murió? Esto no estaba en el diario. Él lo mantuvo digno. Y en la descarga de Siba, 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 cuando las mujeres levantan las manos como alas de albatros, pienso: Fiba, ¿en qué momento tramaste tu plan para ser liberada de este hombre condenado? Gracias a Margaret Lim por este poema.
Dear Fiba, your name half rhymes with Siba, the dance move that's in. So when I think of you, I say Siba, 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 like in the song. And you know, Fiba, it's not a bad comparison. For when women Siba, they squat for takeoff, spread wings, and fly. When they Siba, Fiba, their feet remember the wheels and tons you did at fellow slaves' wakes, singing, when I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. And the takeoff, when the body comes fully into play, is the throwing off of shackles. And I sing, Siva, 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 and think of you, Fiba, in miserable slavery. How you suffered through each infection Thistlewood gave you. As he comes, every skirt it crosses mind to fuss. How you must have wailed when your son, his mulatto child, died. It wasn't in the diary, he kept it dignified. And as the women release in Siva, 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 their hands like albatross wings, I think, Fiba, in what moment did you hatch your freedom plan on this confounded man?
So if I could start I'll ask, how did the idea of this volume, of this book, originate?
Maria, should I
I guess
start?
I should have.
Yeah,
I guess I
please.
should have asked.
Um, I guess we had preliminary discussions before 2017. The actual project began in 2017. One day I was at the university and Maria showed up in my office to consult with me about possible translation projects because she has a background in translation of Caribbean literature. And I had been having a lot of conversations with Caribbean women writers at the literary festivals and other events that brought us together. And amongst the women, there was a feeling like it would be better to get the regional connection between women writers. I had those conversations fresh in my mind when Maria wanted to see if we could propose together a translation project. So I suggested that we try to do an anthology of contemporary Caribbean women poets, especially those poets who had emerged and started publishing since the year 2000. And we did research on which poets to include and which poems to include. But we actually got to the translation itself 3 weeks before Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. And we did most of our work face to face in Puerto Rico. Maria, do you want to add anything about the genesis? That's my memory of how
Yeah,
we
sure.
started.
We decided that we wanted to focus this project on contemporary women poets, and as Loretta was saying, even though a small portion of them had published and had some kind of recognition before the 21st century, most of them started publishing in the first decades of the 21st century, and so we decided to emphasize on what in Cuba has been called la generación cero. So with this idea that we had in mind of favoring and boosting a dialogue between those women writers from the English-speaking Caribbean and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, no? And as Loretta was saying, translations were face-to-face, and this is very important. So we worked collaboratively, Loretta and myself, and I think that was very enriching for the project. No, the fact that we translated into Spanish and into English with four hands. No, both of us together, right? And then we started by looking at previous anthologies, right? Reading many collections, deciding who to include, who not to include, which was very difficult, no, to leave people out and decide, no, what poets we wanted to include. And as Loretta was saying, we started a couple of weeks before Irma, the Hurricane Irma, and so that made it difficult at the beginning, no? The process of starting and so on.
But
We could say, too, that we ended up at the end of the day with 33 Caribbean women poets, 12 coming from Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico, and 21 coming from the Anglophone Caribbean and the diaspora. We didn't want to just have one poem to represent a poet because we wanted to suggest the range of their work and the range of themes that women writers are addressing. So we chose 3 to 5 poems by each of the included poets, which means that the anthology has over 100 poems, and all of the poems are included in both Spanish and English.
you mentioned the hands-on process of translating. And could you talk a little bit more about that, Maria?
So, from the beginning, we were aware that translating is never neutral or an innocent act, right?
That's it.
And so uh, we translated taking into account the fact that we are translating poetry from a region that is linguistically complex. And so we believe that by translating from a feminist and post-colonial perspective, we can, our translations can have a potential, no, to be transformative. So so the idea was to resist those kind of strategies that tend to erase the differences and the linguistic and cultural differences of the region. And that was something that from the beginning we paid close attention to. No? So for example, the issue of Creole, how to translate the different island Creoles into Spanish, the different strategies that we would need to employ in order to not erase difference and provide translations that were homogenizing. No? That was one of the most important aims, right, Loretta?
Right, right. And the other thing I think was significant about our project of collaborating together is we both have many years of experience with Caribbean literature and are part of the Caribbean writers community. But we didn't work how a lot of translation collaborations work, in that I would be more on the poetry side and Maria would work more from the translation side, and we would make a kind of draft of a translation in the language, and then the poet would come in and make it poetic. We didn't work that way at all. And we didn't work so that I might do the translations from Spanish to English, and she might do them from English to Spanish, the dominant languages that we come from. We worked really collaboratively on every translation, so that it might be me sometimes who brought the poem first draft into Spanish, and she might bring it into English, the first draft. But in terms of working on the lines, we're always working together, face to face, not remotely, on these translations. And I think it made an incredible difference in how the poems came out, that it wasn't one person's job to do a basic text and another's to add the poetry. It was always a very integrated process of us working each line together to come up with a translation that we thought really honored the poet's intention and still read very well in the second target language. And we learned incredibly from that. Maria's become a very good poet now, and I love translation.
But you know, it strikes me when you mentioned the hurricane that hit, um, and I would ask how did you work with that kind of disruption, and do you think, Loretta, that it strengthened you in some way and gave a sense of resilience? How did you work through it? I mean, literally the physical working through the situation.
Right. We started the project in my university office. 3 weeks into it, Irma and Maria had hit. My university shut down for 7 months after that. We had no electricity for months. We had no running water. We couldn't get bottled water. We had no access to Wi-Fi. And our process of research on the words really required that we could get online. So, and I have to give Maria a lot of credit for not getting on an airplane and going to Spain. She didn't do that. She stayed in Puerto Rico for the whole hardship of that aftermath of Hurricane Maria, and was there every day to do the translation projects. Um, we searched for Wi-Fi wherever it existed. So we ended up by the Bay of San Juan, outside at a Wi-Fi hotspot, or in a parking lot where there was one place to plug in a plug, or at a restaurant that allowed us to use their generator and Wi-Fi. And we finally ended up getting collaborative office space at a renovated prison. So we did most of our work in a renovated prison with a lot of other displaced small business people who were in the same room with us.
Oh my God, that is the very definition of resilience.
There were months of work
Maria?
with them.
I that made that I can't tell you exactly where we were when we translated that given poem. I can't tell you exactly if we were in the parking lot or if we were in the renovated prison or if we were in Raíces, which we found that space in which there was electricity and on top of that Wi-Fi. So I can't I really remember for each of the poems where we were, whether it was at the beginning of Oso Blanco, of the renovated prison, no, because it it became such an important project to continue doing, and it made so much sense, and and so it's more than just a project. It means a lot.
And to what extent did the themes that you then encountered in the poems by these women poets, uh, what did they center around?
We have really wide-ranging themes. As you might expect, the women writers engage with history. So there are lots of critical looks at the history of the Caribbean, the complex history that we have. Every issue that might pertain to a woman's childhood, her relationship with her family, her relationship to her own body, folklore, reworking folklore to make it transgressive and feminist. Um, yeah, we really try to be as broad as possible in bringing these themes, but all of the poems somehow touch on the Caribbean or the Caribbean diaspora realities and visions and women's experience. Do you have a
And
more detailed list of the themes?
No, no, something that you mentioned already is the fact that we chose for each poet different themes. Like we not to emphasize only on the women experience, which we did, but that together with other themes, very political poems, very engaged, no, as we were saying, poems also about poetry. No, there's a small portion, but some poems about poetry and about literature.
The literary styles are also widely differing. We have very experimental poets who do very unexpected things with the page, and we have, you know, very imagistic poets who write brief poems. We have longer poems, uh, poems that are based on the blues or other, musical rhythms or marketplace calls. So the literary influences and styles experimented with, we also wanted to represent the gamut there.
And how difficult, Maria, you mentioned the language and of course the Creole. How difficult was it working with trying to translate those uh, different aspects of Creole?
What we recognized is that we needed to use different strategies. Whenever one poem, I mean, we understand the linguistic context as one that is enriching, no, for literature. So the fact that there's these different mediums is something that enriches literature and something that might then create ambiguities for non-Creole speakers. So we knew that we are equipped with a basic knowledge of Creole so that we could understand all the layers. So that was the first phase for us to understand the covert meanings that might exist in certain lines, that if you are not familiar with Creole, if that doesn't resonate, it doesn't sound in your ear, then you are not capable of translating that into another language. Um, so, of course, we decided that when it comes to translating it into Spanish, there are Caribbean varieties of Caribbean Spanish, and that we would tend towards these linguistic varieties. But not only that, I'm now remembering a poem by Margaret Lim, by Jamaican poet Margaret Lim, which is clearly marked, there's a clearly marked voice that is Jamaican Creole, that is Patois, in which we, for example, emphasize on Rastafarianism in the sense that we emphasized on a cultural element that we thought conveyed the Creoleness, as a way of, as I was saying, not homogenizing that line. Do you remember the line exactly, Loretta, that I'm mentioning? Let
Yeah,
me
I know
find
which
it.
poem you're referring
Uh, just it's in Star
So
Interviews Andrew Brown, right?
it's the final two lines.
Exactly.
And it's a poem
And
about the arrest of someone, the jailing and arrest of someone named Andre Brown is reported in the newspaper. And in the English, the last two lines, and last year, the boy, them whole die for, being arrested. So how do we do that in Spanish? Do you have the line?
in Spanish, we translated it as these two lines, y el año pasado, Babylon me encerró. So here we're emphasizing that the voice that is speaking is a Jamaican voice, one that uses the language of Rastafari. So this change, this kind of equivalence is one strategy that we thought worked in this case. So this example is to emphasize on how every time Creole appears, you might need to use different strategies. And some of them might be to go for the Caribbean Spanish variety, but others can also be emphasized, no, and used, no, in order not to make this invisible, no, in order not to erase this difference.
Wow.
We also consulted a lot with the poets. All of the poets saw drafts of our translations, and we engaged in dialogues. So if we had any doubt, they're the same vocabulary word, for instance, in the Spanish speaking Caribbean, might mean something different in the different islands. So we consulted with the writers and we got clear if we had any doubt about some of the words. And I think that process of collaborating not only with each other, but really involving the writers in the process helped us respect, again, the Creole usages or the Spanish variants that we have in the Caribbean. And we resisted doing a lot of endnotes to explain things. Where the poets themselves had provided endnotes, we translated those and used those. But otherwise, we tried to make the translation complete enough that we weren't adding our own kind of apparatus onto the poem.
Yeah, I noticed that, and that's an important point when you're working with well, across nuanced um, language in that manner. I was going to ask about um, a description of other challenges that you might have faced, but that's such an important one. The language, because poetry, much of it is not just what's written on the page. Much of it is also the sound, the intonation of the poem as it's read. You know, um, But any other challenges that come to mind that you had when you were when you were translating, when you were editing?
Something that we took into consideration too is the fact that we were translating 33 different poets. And it's not the same translating a whole collection than 3 or up to 5 poems by each of the 33 poets. So then that that really required us to enter into, there's this idea that the translator is the most intimate reader, no? So for each of the poets, they had their different kind of strategies as well, no? As Loretta was saying, the different narrative styles, not the differences of 33 different poets, no? So that was a challenge too. It's not the same, no, translating a whole collection than translating so many different poets. Yeah.
I could say too that sometimes we were even surprised ourselves at how well, say, a poem written in Jamaican patois read once we got into Spanish. How well it read. We could go, oh, this really worked. But we also found our limits. There were poems that, well, at least one poem by a Trinidadian poet who tested our limits, and we had to come to the conclusion that if we were like halfway through the translation of one of her poems, and we understood that if we tried to really bring that into Spanish, we were going to do damage to that poem. So there are some poems that you will erase the rhythms of the language and the Creole usages to the point where you're going to render that poem into something, even with your best effort, into something that doesn't really do justice to the original poem. And in that case, we chose a different poem by the poet. We knew when to throw up the flag and
Yeah,
do
yeah.
something else. Yeah, I think that's important to know too. You can't flatten a poem out when you bring it into another language, especially what about Carnival in Trinidad?
Okay, yeah. And like again, I'm hopping on it, but I mean, each part of the Caribbean has so much vibrant and excellent and wonderful writing. To limit it to 12 poems from the Hispanic Caribbean, tremendously difficult. I found. I mean, again, why that balance or imbalance? I don't know, between the Hispanic and the Anglo.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I think the limits of space and time of the project, the anthology is well over 400 pages long, and we did try to get at least a balance in the Hispanophone Caribbean of 4, 4, and 4 in the 3 islands. And I think we're also, with the Spanish speaking Caribbean, we did something a little bit different than the English speaking in that we chose several poets from the diaspora for the Anglophone Caribbean, because a lot of our writers in the collection do publish with People Tree, and some of them are based in England. In the case of the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, you might have writers living in Spain, but the writers who are Hispanic Caribbean and living in the States, they have an access to a publishing platform there, a publishing world that is really expansive, and many of them have been translated in full collections to English. So it might be where the imbalance is that we saw that that work was being done with the Spanish-speaking Caribbean in the U.S. publishing world. And it's much less so the case in the Anglophone Caribbean. I think that Many of our writers might have had a few individual poems translated before, but the majority of our writers have not been translated into other languages or into Spanish in any significant way. So if we'd had another
And
few years at 700 pages, I think we would have wanted to do a lot more.
yeah,
It
yeah.
was hard to
And
do poets from
in terms of the publisher, did you
Klobah.
start with this deal? I mean, was it easy to find this publisher?
Well, People Tree Press is the publisher, and as you know, they're the best small independent publisher of Caribbean writers, period. And we already had a working relationship with that press because I've published with them in the past. We proposed the idea to them, and as is expected, Jeremy Pointing and Hannah Bannister were very enthusiastic about the idea. And they helped us apply for a PIN translation award, and we did that successfully. So the book has received a PIN award, and it's also received recognition from the Poetry Book Society as the translation choice for 2020 for the summer. And that's, that came out of the collaboration with People Tree Press. I think in the long term, we would also like to find a publishing house in Spain or in Latin America so that the book can be more widely available to locations that are primarily Spanish speaking. That's the next part of our project. And it's going to be available starting on September 3rd. It will be available by the time the Bocas event takes place. It will be available in digital format for Kindle from People Tree as well.
Okay. Wow. I was gonna also ask about any do you have any plans to do some more collaborative, more translation work together? Maria?
Yeah. After once we finished the manuscript, we translated some poems already. We have translated some poems already, and we are going to translate a non-fiction piece by one of the Cuban poets, Regna Rodríguez Iglesias. So these are the nearest kind of projects that we have. Also, we've also theorized a little bit on our translation strategies. We've also written an article on, we felt we needed to reflect on our choices as translators from this perspective of, as from the perspective of feminist and post-colonial translation, this kind of intersectional feminist translation strategies that we've employed during the process. So we've theorized on that as well in an article that has just appeared in Mutatis Mutandis, a Colombian journal. And we have some projects in terms of literary translation.
We've grown into a very nice relationship as translators. I think we're very effective in working with each other, but we don't see this project of The Sea Needs No Ornament as finished with the publication of the book, because the real purpose of the project was to bring women writers in dialogue with each other across the linguistic boundaries, and to make the book available for readers so that readers also could cross those linguistic lines that can sometimes separate us and prevent solidarity within the region. So both with People Tree and any other venue that will host us, we want to plan a series of readings and dialogues between the women writers so that they can read each other, they can hear their own poems in the other language, and they can have a dialogue that hopefully will foment long-lasting literary friendships between the women writers in the region. This year, we want to devote ourselves to helping make platforms for the writers, the 33 writers in the book, to get to know each other and to get to support each other.
Oh my God, I think that is so very interesting and so very necessary at this time. And perhaps, not to bring the COVID into our discussion, but perhaps the one thing that this virus has done for us is that we've perfected our virtual platforms. And I know, for example, that I teach a course on Caribbean women writers. It would be fantastic to have a brief discussion. So I think that, as you say, keeping the dialogue open and um, keeping a focus on the feminist perspective that you both mentioned before is so very important.
I mentioned at the beginning some of the conversations that I had been privy to by being at the different literary festivals, by going to writing workshops in Trinidad and Jamaica, and being amongst a community of women writers. And sometimes there are conversations that take place that are kind of behind the scenes, and women express their feelings about the kind of opportunities they've had as women writers in terms of invitations, fellowships, um, prize money, awards. And we have really good women writers that have emerged since the year 2000. And of course, all the women writers who came before. But the opportunities are truly not always the same for the women writers and the male writers. And, part of this project is also building that solidarity between women where you can have a space to articulate that situation and make these writers more widely known. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I don't know if you want to add in anything else that we can bring to the conversation, but I certainly have no more questions. I know that Maria, you are going to introduce us to the next two speakers who will be reading from their who will be reading some of their poetry.
Mhm. So yes, we are going to listen to Trinidadian poet Danielle Boodoo-Fortuné read her poem Boa Grávida, and then Cuban poet Regna Rodríguez Iglesias will read Boa Grávida in Spanish, in translation. And then we'll listen to Legna reading her own poem, Sería raro, muy raro que olvidara, in Spanish in the original, and then Danielle Boodoo-Fortuné will read the translation into English of the poem. That is, it would be strange, so strange for me to forget.
When we were new, our love still minnow soft and silver, you set their names like nets along the water's edge. Now the first, a sun surfaces, a great fish writhing in the basket of my hips. These last gravid days of rain we digest the remains of years. You speak of everything to come, how you long to cradle the lotus bud of his skull in the broad leaf of your hand, to swim in with him from the other side. Until then, let us wait here in the restless earth, whisper to each other in mangrove tongues. Tell me I am beautiful and cold. I will tell you how thirsty I am for a mouthful of light. At night I ache, veins purple and rise with the sudden season of blood. Pelvic plates shift, bones shudder. I am the great mother boa turning the soft egg of the world beneath my ribs. I will tear myself in two and heal before morning.
Boa grávida. Cuando éramos nuevos, nuestro amor aún suave y plateado como pececillo, desplegaste sus nombres como redes a lo largo de la orilla del agua. Ahora el primero, un hijo, sale a la superficie, un gran pez revolcándose en la cesta de mis caderas. Estos últimos grávidos días de lluvia digerimos lo que queda de los años. Hablas de todo lo que viene, como deseas mecer el pimpollo de loto de su cráneo en la amplia hoja de tu mano, nadar con él desde el otro lado. Hasta ese momento esperémonos aquí en la tierra inquieta, susurrémonos unos a otros en lenguas del manglar. Dime que soy bella y fría, te diré cuán sedienta estoy por llenarme la boca de luz. De noche siento dolor, las venas se vuelven púrpuras y crecen con esta repentina temporada de sangre. Las placas pélvicas se desplazan, los huesos se estremecen. Soy la gran madre boa, dando vueltas al huevo blando del mundo, bajo mis costillas. Me desgarraré en dos y sanaré antes de la mañana. Sería raro, muy raro que olvidara. Sería raro, muy raro que olvidara la imagen luminosa en el laboratorio. Aquellos flamboyanes viniéndoseme encima y yo tan acostada desnuda para abajo. Estaban en el techo, la imagen en el techo, flamboyanes enormes de fuego, flamboyanes. Abrí mis dos piernitas y dejé que se hundiera dentro de mí aquel bate de béisbol con un nylon. Es preciso, so sorry, es preciso y exacto, pero los flamboyanes también eran precisos. Para un ultrasonido de solo 6 semanas es preciso un paisaje de árboles de fuego. En el techo los árboles parecían más falsos de lo que son los árboles que no tienen raíces. Ni raíz, ni semilla, ni fundas de semillas, ni tronco, ni follaje, ni pétalos, ni ramas. A pesar de que el bate de béisbol era largo, la sangre salió igual. En el laboratorio, flamboyanes de sangre. No recuerdo la música, Beyoncé o Rihanna.
It would be strange, so strange, to forget the luminous image in the lab clinic. Those flamboyant trees looming over me, and me lying flat with my lower half nude. They were on the ceiling, the image on the ceiling. Enormous flamboyant trees on fire. Flamboyance. I opened my 2 legs and allowed that baseball bat covered with a plastic baggie to sink into me. It's necessary. So sorry. It's necessary and it's precise. But were the flamboyance also necessary? For an ultrasound at only 6 weeks, is the landscape of flame trees necessary? On the ceiling, the trees looked more fake than those trees that don't have roots do. No root, no seed pods, no trunk, no foliage, no petals, no branches. Though the baseball bat was long, blood still flowed out. In the lab clinic, bloody flamboyant trees. I don't remember the music, Beyonce or Rihanna.
Okay. The sea needs no ornament. El mar no necesita ornamento. A bilingual anthology of contemporary Caribbean women poets. I want to thank you so much, Loretta and also you, Maria, for being here with us today and having this conversation. The book is available. The book is available on Amazon.com and People Tree Press in print form and in digital format.
Thanks so much, Bocas. Thanks so much, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.